A truck with 3 or more axles built before July 25, 1980 isn't required to have brakes on its front wheels. That exemption was never repealed. It's still on the books today. And for a long stretch of trucking history, drivers wanted it that way. The men who ran those rigs weren't reckless. A driver could order a brand new tractor straight from the factory and have it built with nothing on the steer axle. No brakes up front, on purpose. Right up until 1980, that's how plenty of new rigs came off the line. Ask one of those drivers why, and he wouldn't talk about saving money. He'd talk about staying alive. Here's the fear he was living with. On a wet or icy road, if the front tires lock up under braking, the truck loses two things in the same instant: stopping power and steering. A locked tire skidding across the surface has less grip than a tire that's still rolling. So the moment those steer tires quit turning, the momentum of the loaded trailer keeps driving the whole rig forward. 8 locked drive tires shoving ahead, 2 skidding steer tires with nothing left to hold the line. The tractor starts to swing. That's a jackknife, and on ice it happens faster than a man can lift his foot off the pedal. The old-timers watched it happen, and they drew a hard conclusion. If locked front brakes on a slick road can kill you, get rid of the front brakes. And they weren't imagining the danger. Those early brakes could grab. Weight pitches forward hard under a panic stop. A front axle that normally handled maybe a quarter to a third of the braking could suddenly be asked to do half of it or more. A grabbing front brake on a greasy road really could pull a truck sideways. They had half the truth. Locked steer tires on ice are deadly. That part was right. What they got wrong was the fix. The answer was never to tear the brakes off the front of the truck. The answer was to stop the wheels from locking in the first place. And there was already a name for that: anti-lock. You can see how deep the fear ran by what they bolted to the dashboard. A driver could spec a valve up in the cab whose only job was to weaken his own front brakes. Flip it on a slick day and it choked the air going to the steer axle, so those brakes couldn't grab and lock. A hand control, right there under his fingers, built for the sole purpose of turning his front brakes down. The whole philosophy of the era in one piece of hardware. That valve still exists on modern trucks, but look at what changed. Today's version is automatic and sealed. It trims the pressure to the front brakes on its own, then gets out of the way the instant you stand on the pedal hard. The driver can't touch it, and by law, it isn't allowed to cut the front braking force by more than half. The thing drivers once worked by hand is now locked down, hidden, and legally leashed, because the hand-operated version turned out to be part of the problem, not the cure. Then, the federal government moved to settle the argument for everyone. On the 1st of March, 1975, a new standard took effect that set hard stopping distance targets for heavy trucks and buses. On paper, it never mentioned anti-lock. In practice, the only realistic way most builders could hit those numbers was to fit anti-lock brakes. So the government had, in effect, mandated the exact technology that could have ended the entire front brake argument. There was just one problem. The anti-lock systems of 1975 did not work. Not worked poorly. Failed, at rates that are hard to believe when you read them now. Consolidated Freightways spot-checked its own trailers built to the new standard and found 65% of the anti-lock units had quit. General Motors ran its own check and came back with a 59% failure rate. Another survey, done at the request of Congress in 1976, put the number near 48%. Something close to half of these systems were dead in the field. And here's the cruel part. When one of those early systems failed, it didn't switch off quietly. It handed the driver the exact nightmare the old-timers had spent years warning about. The high-torque front brakes came back with nothing holding them in check, and the truck would pull, lock a wheel, go unstable, jackknife. For the man who'd always argued that front brakes were dangerous on ice, here was the federal government proving his point at 70 miles an hour. Every unit that died in service confirmed the folklore all over again. So the industry did something drivers rarely get to do. It fought back and it won. Paccar, the company behind Kenworth and Peterbilt, joined with the American Trucking Associations and took the government to court over the standard. In 1978, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with them and set aside the stopping distance test requirements. The reason was damning. During the case, the agency admitted it had done no compliance testing in the entire year and more since the rule took effect. Before rolling the standard out across the whole industry, it had tested 3 trucks. 3. The court didn't throw out the whole standard. The timing rules, the equipment rules, the air reservoir rules all survived. But the stopping distance test that had forced anti-lock onto trucks was gone, and with it went truck anti-lock brakes for almost 20 years. They wouldn't be required again until tractors built on or after March of 1997 and air brake trailers a year after that. The irony is almost too clean. The agency was right about the big thing. Trucks did need anti-lock brakes, and the industry was resisting a genuine safety advance. History proved both. But the agency was so wrong about whether its solution actually worked that it handed that same industry a 20-year reprieve from the one technology that would eventually save the most lives. Nobody in this fight walked away clean. As for the front brakes themselves, the government did finally force them back onto new heavy trucks, drawing its line at rigs built from July of 1980 forward. Everything older was grandfathered, and that exemption was never taken off the books. That's the rule from the very start of this story. Still sitting in the federal code, still technically legal, the reason a pre-80 rig can roll down the interstate right now with a dead steer axle. The belief died, the rule outlived it, and all of it. The brakes ripped off on purpose, the anti-lock that failed, the 20-year court fight, was still only half the war. The other half had nothing to do with whether the brakes existed and everything to do with whether anyone kept them adjusted. Air brakes drift out of adjustment as the linings wear. Keeping them right used to mean a man crawling under the truck to reset them by hand, daily, on a hard-working rig at real cost, with real room for error. And an out-of-adjustment brake doesn't warn you. It works fine on the flat, then fades away right when you need it most, halfway down a long grade, with the full weight of the load pushing you toward the bottom. The fix seemed obvious. Automatic slack adjusters, required on new trucks and tractors in 1994 and on trailers in 1995, were supposed to hold the adjustment themselves and end the problem for good. They didn't. Mechanics kept reaching for a wrench and cranking on the automatic adjusters by hand, which papered over the real fault underneath and quietly wore out the very mechanism that was supposed to do the job. In the 2024 roadside inspection blitz run across North America, the single most common reason a truck was pulled out of service was defective brakes, not in the 1970s, last year, and it still kills. On a steep downgrade in Glen Rock, Pennsylvania, in the spring of 2003, a loaded dump truck lost its brakes on the hill. 2 of its 4 brakes had gone out of adjustment, worn hardware the automatic adjusters could no longer take up, on a truck whose mechanics had been hand cranking the slacks instead of finding the real fault. It couldn't stop. It ran down the grade and into the cars ahead of it. 2 people in those cars were killed, a driver and an 11-year-old child. The front brakes were the battle everyone remembers. The adjustment was the war, and the war is still being lost.